Welcome to the Private Practice Pro podcast, a podcast dedicated to helping therapists cultivate success. Here's your host, Kelley Stevens.
This podcast is sponsored by Simple Practice. I've been using Simple Practice since 2016, which has helped me run a smooth and profitable private practice over the years. It has simplified everything from scheduling to billing, giving me a better balance between the work I'm so passionate about and the family time I'm not willing to miss out on. Check out the episode notes to get a free 2-month trial of Simple Practice, my preferred all-in-one HIPAA-compliant solution. Welcome back, everybody, to the Private Practice Pro podcast. Josie, I'm just going to let you introduce yourself and tell us your name, obviously, where in the world you're sitting, and tell us a little bit about your private practice.
Yeah, so I'm Josie. I use she, her pronouns. I am in Denver, Colorado, but I'm originally from California. Funny enough, when I first messaged Kelley, I was telling her I went to UC Santa Barbara for undergrad. So I know
it's such a small world. I feel like people always recognize my 805 phone number, you know?
Yeah.
But I'm sitting here in Santa Barbara, so it's close to my heart.
Yeah, for sure. I own a group practice now. I just expanded to a group practice in July. And I have 4 therapists on my team. 3 of them are interns and 1 is a contractor.
Awesome.
And my core tenant, well, I live kind of by 3 things as a owner. Experience doesn't pay the bills, which Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez said. And I wholeheartedly agree.
Yes.
Identity-based trauma is real. We cannot act as if racism and sexism and homophobia don't happen.
Yes.
And the third is it's important to be person-centered. Meet the human by being a human first. So I think that's been the baseline of my practice and the way that I work. And I think the way that I run my business is very so aligned with that. Yeah. My interns will say, I can work on Saturday or I can work at 8 o'clock. And I look at them no, you're not working on Why would you do that? No, I understand that we've been conditioned to do that, but I believe that rest is essential for us as therapists. So I think it impacts the way that we work. So I guess that's me in a nutshell.
100%. Well, and I was saying to you off camera that I feel like we know each other, even though we know each other primarily through Instagram and my courses. And so for anyone listening to this episode, essentially, Josie took one of my courses, right? I'm pretty sure, the Private Practice Roadmap. And and you're going to take the marketing one, right?
Yeah,
you're in the beta group. We're having a beta test group go through the course first. Should be in the next week or so, Josie. We're making sure all the kinks get out of it, just in case you're wondering. And it's always good, before a course, to have therapists run through it actually, and make sure every link is working or whatever. We see little things that are not working. And we were messaging and emailing and about just different questions about the course. And I can't remember how it came up, but I think I said, let's just do this on the podcast and let's just talk about private practice ownership and any questions you have and kind of do this kind of like a mini coaching session where you have a chance to just ask whatever comes up, whatever's going on in your business right now, and we're going to kind of get into it. But before we do that, could you just give us a little overview of the evolution of your practice? Kind of when did you start? Did you start part-time? Did you start full-time? Kind of give us that lay of the land.
Yeah. I graduated with my MSW in 2020.
Yeah.
My master's in education in 2021 and my MFT in 2022. So I've been in a lot of school.
Yeah.
And I started my practice out of pure necessity. I was working in a group practice and I was making very little money. I barely had a roof over my head money. And it got to a point after a year of doing that where I was I had no savings. I'm living paycheck to paycheck and I've done all the school for what?
Right.
And my boyfriend at the time, now husband, was well, you've seen your other people around you start private practices. why don't you just go for it?
Why not? Yeah.
Like, you're young. Like, if you fall on your face, fall on your face. And
Yeah,
I was
whatever.
Like, I don't think I could do it and all that stuff. She's like, well, go on Instagram, see what people are doing.
Right.
I was like, okay. And so I started like looking at people on Instagram, and within like a week of doing that, I gave 2 weeks notice at my job, had started the business with like $50 in my bank account.
Wait, wait, I didn't know this about you. So what was it we got to go back. So when you say you just started looking at people on Instagram, what do you mean by like you were looking at people who were doing it, or you were advertising yourself, or what?
So
what were you doing?
Myself. So I did a postmaster's certificate in marriage and family therapy. And so most of the folks in that program are in private practice. And so I started going and like looking at their Instagram pages and like seeing what they were doing in their practices, and knowing that they had the same training as me and were charging $120 a session. And I was lucky if I made $120 in a day. Like I was lucky. If that happened. So I think when I was just like, what's the worst that could happen? You know, I started and it fails. And I come from a pretty long line of business owners I've learned. From my grandfather.
Like your parents or who?
My grandfather and my 2 uncles in Ghana are both businessmen. And so they told my mom, they were like, if she falls on her face, we'll make sure she's okay. So I think once I had their blessing, I started and I just hustled really, really, really hard. I don't think I've told you this, but you were the first Instagram account I found on private practice outside of like personally.
In 2020?
Or 2021.
This was a while ago. So this is like, I started Private Practice Pro, the Instagram, not the company, but the Instagram, when in 2020. So this would have been like early days. Nice.
Yeah. And I think I saw posts where you were saying like, make sure you go out to a lot of coffees and go out to a lot of lunches and like just meet people. And I was like, well, I can borrow money from my sister. And go to
coffee's not too just get coffee. You don't even have to like do anything fancy yet.
What was so nice is that most of the time the other person would cover it for me. Especially from like a company or something. So I just started like meeting with a lot of folks at behavioral hospitals, other private practices. I started talking to my professors, just like really putting myself out there. And I also took my clients with me. Because
from the group practice, you mean?
From the group practice. I was the only person of color. These Black female therapists. And I think a lot of folks like my particular style. So I started.
They liked you.
Right. And I started seeing those folks, I think at like $45 a session. I was like, it's something. It's more than what I was making. So I did that for like 6 months. And then more people were like, who were full pay were beginning to roll in. It just kind of like shot up from there.
And do you take insurance, or did you take insurance then?
I did. I'm contemplating taking Medicaid, which I was going to ask you about. But I was taking insurance once I got licensed. I should name this too. In the state of Colorado, you don't have to be fully licensed to start your own private practice. So
nice. I didn't know that.
I started it pre-licensed and just had my supervisor's blessing. Because I also paid for my own supervision at this job. It was a whole thing.
Wow.
So I could just like take my supervisor with me and just like go.
That's amazing.
Yeah. I think it's weird to think about now, but like in the beginning it was rough. And within like 5 to 6 months of starting my private practice, I got engaged.
You had a lot of changes. It was a pandemic. Let's not forget.
Pandemic.
Right.
All at the same time. And so I think that really worked to my advantage. Like people were home. The world had not gone through what we were going through in 100 years. So there were very few people alive who had experienced it. And so I think people just rolling in and I got full within a month.
Holy shit. Within a month? Oh my God. Okay, but that's fast. I mean, even like during that time, that's still really fast. That's amazing.
And I think there are a couple of factors though.
Yeah.
One is there are not many therapists like me in my area. That's one.
Yeah.
Two is the fact that it was COVID. And three, I think the networking piece was huge. And even
you hustled,
and talking with my friends.
Yeah.
I always sent referrals before I got them back. And that's just generally now.
Yes.
Like if I am meeting with you, I'm probably going to send someone to you before I expect anything in return. And that really saved my butt heavily.
Yes. I mean, I think this is something that's so underrated is the give a referral to get a referral. People do not like to hear it. Like when I tell people you need to send clients to other people before they refer to you, they're like, what? You know, like that's not how it should work. You should only be sending people to the most clinically competent people. And I'm like, sorry, that's how the world works.
That's
because if you have two equally talented therapists, and one of them has sent you some clients and one of them hasn't, you're obviously going to send clients to the person that's already sent you people.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. So let's talk a little bit. I want to go back, first of all, to what you said, because we kind of glazed over it, but I think it's important what you said about coming from a family of business people or entrepreneurs, because that initial first step outside of a group can be this, I think, actually genuinely the hardest step, you know? So what you said about this idea that like, if you fell flat on your face, your family had your back, or like, you'll just figure it out. You're young, you know, like you could figure out something else or whatever. I don't know. I think that's a really important point that you made that's like underrated, you know?
It is. I didn't realize there were so many entrepreneurs in my family when I started. It wasn't until I talked to my uncle and he was like, yeah, this person. And he was like just naming people. And I was like, oh, I didn't put it together that they were entrepreneurs. And a lot of my cousins have become entrepreneurs or like had a stint in their lives where they were. So I think it felt less scary to do. Because especially my two uncles, like they did it, you know, and they did it really, really well.
Wow.
So I think that made me less fearful.
When you were at that point, when you opened and you gave your notice and you had like $50 in your bank account, and you can tell me if I'm asking too personal of questions, but I know people listening to this are going to be like, you know, how did you do this? So were you thinking to yourself, like, how am I going to pay my rent next month? Or how did just those few months work?
So when I immediately, I saw my first client November 8th, 2021. I had already paid my rent for November, like the week before. So that was already covered. And within those 3 weeks, the clients that I took with me were enough to pay my next month's rent. So like that was like, but I was also seeing like 8 to 9 people a day. Like I was just like hustling.
So you knew coming out of the group that you were going to have at least some income coming in the next month.
Yes. And I think another piece is I was a consultant at the time with the ed degree. And so I took on a pretty big project at that time too. Right. Which really helped. Yeah. And I think it's what got me through to about like January while I was building. So it ended up helping.
But that's amazing. I mean, that bridge time is really a scary time for people, you know, of like, I know when I first opened, I did something similar. I left a group and I took some of my clients with me. I wasn't like full with those clients, but I was like maybe half full. And I knew I could pay my rent with that amount of clients. Like, was I thriving financially? No. But could I like make it work? Yes. And then I kept telling myself, like, worst case scenario, I'll go I did it like in that same timeline, November, December, January. I just kind of said to myself, like, worst case scenario, I'll just go get a seasonal job at Trader Joe's or anthropology or something. And then I didn't end up having to do that, but like that. But it's always interesting to know what people did in that like few month bridge time when you're trying to get full, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think I had plan A, plan B, and C of like, this either works and I get enough clients, or I go and I'm a consultant and I do that way more hours of that. Or I go in and I start teaching again. I'm in a K-12 like summer program or like a winter break program, or like I had like plans. So it wasn't just like I mean, yes, it was a pretty intense jump. And I did a lot of planning in those like 5 days.
Right.
But before that, I had no idea what I was doing.
I'm not exact same way. I gotta admit, like, I'm like, oh, I'm gonna do this. Okay, I'm doing this tomorrow. Okay, like Mr. Google and I, like, we're gonna hang out for 5 days and figure this out. Okay, so I want to make sure we get to some of your current questions about kind of the expansion of your business, and now that you have some people working for you and some colleagues, where you're going. So, where should we start? What part do you want to start on?
I think I kind of want to start with like the multiple streams of income piece.
Let's do that. That could be a whole thing.
Because like whenever I see your Instagram, like I saw your post where you named how much you made in a month, and I literally like put my phone down and was like, wait, Kelley is on.
I know.
What?
I know. It's like I get a little embarrassed. I'm not going to lie to you. Like, I get a little like, we had a really good month 2 months ago. And I get a little like, I guess I get embarrassed to put it out there on the internet. Like, I'm not embarrassed to say it to my husband or something, but.
Yeah. But also, like, it really helps the rest of us check ourselves. And if we are upset about what you're putting out there, then we have to go to our own therapy to figure out why we're jealous of your success. So I don't think it has anything to do. I don't think it's a Kelley problem. I think it's an other people problem.
It's probably a both, as usual. But yeah, I probably need to talk to my therapist about my like own like, should I say this? But I know like for me earlier in my career, I always felt like you live in Denver, like it's not a low cost of living in Denver. It's not a low cost of living here in California. And as you know, and like the reality is I need to make money in order not only to just survive, but to provide for my kids, for them to go to good school, you know, all these different things. And I think sometimes for me, I get a little like ashamed, like, oh, I shouldn't be talking about how much money I make or whatever. But then I think like if I was my husband or I was my dad, they would talk about it with no problem, you know? So anyway. Okay, let's talk about multiple streams. We could go on for a while and get into my shit, but we probably shouldn't do that. Okay, so are you thinking that you want to incorporate multiple streams of income into your group practice or for you solo? I think that's the first decision.
That's what I can't figure out. So like right now, I have an amazing social media like manager who's like does all this stuff. It's just going to be like my operations manager in my practice. Yeah. And we're like expanding so that I can really focus on like supervision as another stream of income and provide a lot of resources for that. Yeah. So I was thinking me individually so that there are things that are like leveraged income where like I can work up front and just like let it sit and bring in income for me. But I think I get stuck with like, I've been in the mental health field for 5 years. Like, I have a lot of training and a lot of school, and I feel really confident supervising. But like, is someone who's been in the field 20 years going to want to look at something that I 5 years in have made? I don't know.
Well, maybe yes, maybe no. Ultimately, that's not your problem if they buy it or not, right? Like, if somebody 5 years in buys it versus somebody 20 years in buys it, they get to make that decision. If you're putting out something that you're passionate about and you feel like is good, then the clients who are the right fit for it, ideally are going to come and you don't have to necessarily worry about how much experience they have, I guess. Does that make sense?
That does make sense. I think I'm curious about how you knew like building private practices would be your niche outside of being a
Right.
clinician.
Oh, I see. Okay, so I'll tell you my experience, and then I'm getting back to you. But
We're two therapists.
So for me, I was the marketing director for a large kind of outpatient treatment program group practice for 4 years. And then when I left there to start my own private practice, I started my practice. My husband, we had to move a couple times for jobs. And so I ended up moving my practice a couple times, which was like, let me tell you, no fun, but like a good experience nonetheless, because I essentially had to, this was pre-pandemic, like pre-Zoom, right? So I had to like start over a few times, and I had very hyper local practices. And then I also taught at Pepperdine or in their graduate program for 3 or 4 years, just like one semester a year or 2 semesters a year. I teach practicum usually. So I had a lot of experience like helping therapists either launch into being a therapist or launch a private practice, because in the group practice I worked in, my job was to teach the therapist like how to, like basically how to fish, right? Like how to go out, how to get clients because they were part of the group. So that was like part of their role. And once I opened my own business, what I found that I liked the most was talking to other therapists, number one, and talking to like young women, professional women about how to build their businesses. So I ended up having a lot of like these conversations with people about like what they wanted for their life, what they wanted for their career. And I was like, wait, what am I doing? Like what I enjoyed doing was building the practice. And then I loved doing therapy, but I actually found that I missed doing the marketing piece. Like I missed the empowering piece of other therapists more than I wanted to spend my day-to-day seeing clients every single day. And so then to make like a very long story short, I had a baby and the pandemic happened, and all of a sudden I found myself at home for 18 months, and I went back to seeing a full-time practice for a short while. And then, you know, it was pandemic with a newborn. So I was like, wait, I can't make this work. I was late today to our filming You and Me, you know, like imagine if I was still seeing 30 clients a week. So
Right.
that really gave me the courage to be like, okay, I have to find a way to take my knowledge and my skills and leverage that into income that's not attached directly to my personal time. And it was more like I had to. I think similar to like what you were saying about your initial jumping off point, where it's like, okay, I'm leaving. Okay, it's in 5 days. I have to fucking figure it out. And even
Right.
just like what you said about like, okay, now you have to pay your rent in a month. Okay, I'm full in a month. I really believe in that. Like sometimes if you just have to do it, you find a way to do it, you know? And so I think it's the same for multiple streams of income. If you're like, I have to find a way to do this because I'm getting burnt out and because I need to figure it out, then you have to start thinking about like, what is it that you're really excited? Like, because if you get into whether it's social media or podcasting or kind of like that speaker circuit or supervision or whatever it is, all of those type of multiple streams of income as opposed to like real estate or something, you know, at the part where you're leveraging your human capital, like you really have to think about what do you like talking about? Like what could you talk about with a friend for hours and hours and hours? And that's the thing. Because that's what you're going to essentially do. You're going to talk about the same topic a lot.
I feel like I know what it is, but it's
Tell
kind
me.
of it's kind of scary to say.
Say it.
I'm an adjunct at University of Denver.
Yeah.
In graduate school of social work, and I love teaching. And
Yeah.
when they ask me about like when you are taken out of this like bubble of grad school and you're like dumped into the woods to fend for yourself,
Yeah.
like what do you do? And so I find myself answering a lot of my students' questions of like, hey, probably should be figuring out what your niche is. Make sure you're reading a book a month to improve professional development. Make sure you're doing CE. So I think that like
but
getting
that's great.
Grad school into like the new professional world and like really being able to guide and mentor. Yeah. But I'm like, why would I even do that? Because I tried consulting before, and to keep the story short, it did not work. I mean, it worked.
Wait, what do you mean by you tried consulting? Like 1-to-1 or what?
So it was 1-to-1. I was supporting other therapists in building curriculum for their practices so they could have leveraged income. Got it. Using my teaching degree to like basically teach folks how to be able to like build their own courses, workshops, and like use their following or whatever it is to be able to like market what they knew. And even though I could do it, after some time I realized like this is not the thing that I want to
But
spend.
that's different than what you're talking about of like that students after graduate school, helping them figure out their path. Like, and I know exactly what you're talking about because I work as an adjunct too. And I freaking love that part. Like, I'd be like, here's my, any of my like former students listening to this will be like, oh my gosh, texting you is hard. But like, I would give people my number and I'd just be like, text me your question, you know? And like, I'm sure they're like, you have ADHD, like you respond a week later. But like, I do respond eventually. But those are great conversations. And I do think there's ways to leverage that income. So like, number one, well, first of all, as I should always ask is, do you want me just to tell you what I think some options would be? Yeah.
Hold on. I'm going to write this down.
You can't give me a thumbs up. We're on a podcast, dude.
Yeah. Oh, that's funny.
What the records show, Josie gave me a thumbs up on a recorded podcast.
I kind of spaced because I can see Kelley. So
I know, right? I can see you too. We do post these on YouTube, but like most people don't listen on YouTube. Okay. So I'm just going to tell you like off the top of my head. So, and some of these I'm going to tell you because I thought about doing them. So, and like, I'm not. So I was like, oh, okay. So first of all, like if you work as an adjunct, we all know like the pay is not great usually. Right. And so like, if you like, I used to calculate like how much I paid in rent in my office per hour versus like going to teach. And I was like, I think I'm like net losing money when I teach. So I feel like that can be like passion project. Like I loved teaching, like, but I think there are other ways to do it. So like one thing I know I thought of was having some sort of group for students where it wasn't supervision. It wasn't like they're doing their hours with me, but we'd meet once a month or every other week. And it was more like a career development group. Like you have people go through in cohorts of like 8 students, maybe from graduation until licensure or something like that. And they have to make some sort of year-long commitment or whatever. And it's essentially like a group coaching program where you help them like launch into the career that they want. So like, and the benefit of doing something like that is one, you could do it fully virtually. You could say something like only one student per school so that it doesn't become really like, you know, like all students from the same school, or you could not. And you're going to bill it as a group. So you're going to like bill however much per hour, probably more than what you're getting in therapy. Because let's say you have 8 people in there and they're paying $40 a group. 8 times 4 is 30. So it's like $320 an hour versus whatever you're charging now in therapy per hour. So that's like one way to do it. The other way to do it would be to build, like to take whatever knowledge you have about this topic and distill it into like a workbook, a course, an Instagram page. You know, like there's tons of people that are graduating every single year from therapy, master's, and PhD programs that have no idea how to build a career out of the educational knowledge that they've gained, which is essentially what you're doing. And so I think it's like whichever of those interests interest you, whether it's a YouTube channel or a workbook or a course or a group or a hybrid thing where like maybe they get a workbook and they also get a live component. I think it's just kind of like I said earlier, like if you like talking about it, then you just start creating materials or products that are related to that.
Hey, therapists. Are you listening to the show and thinking, I really want to launch my own private practice, but I have no idea where to start? Make sure to check out Kelley's Private Practice Roadmap course. In the course, Kelley gives you the exact steps you need to open your own thriving practice. You can find the link below in the show notes.
I think another piece is like social media scares me. I'll just say it very honestly.
Me too.
I wouldn't know. I think I've like made a real leap in terms of like putting myself out there more and like making more reels, and it's worked.
Yeah.
I think there's just such a fear of like doing something new and putting it out there and then it flopping. So like, I don't know how to overcome the fear of like, what if this doesn't work? Or like, which is
what if it doesn't work? It's the same thing as your private practice. It's like way more higher stakes than creating an Instagram page.
That's fair. I think with the private practice, it felt like there was no choice. It was just like, this just has to work.
Right. Well, I think with social media, in a way, it's the same thing. It's like you're going to have to try a lot of things, and some things are totally going to flop, and it's going to take time, and it's going to take consistency, and then it'll work out. But it's like you have to like kind of say to yourself the same thing, like kind of like I guess, what am I trying to say? I have to like distill my own thoughts. So I remember when I first started my social media page, like looking at like mom influencers. That's who I was following, a lot of like how to get your kid to sleep thing, and thinking to myself, like, it's not like, I think we think of social media as like this big secret club that people have like figured out. Like, oh, how does this person have 10,000 followers? Like, what are they doing that I don't know? But actually, like, if you start to, and I've said this in my podcast before, but if you start to look at influencers in any category, therapy, home, whatever, most of them are actually doing like a lot of the same things. And you start to watch their content from a business perspective. It's like, how many times a week are they posting? What are they posting that's getting more views? When you consume social media content of your own, like whether you follow florists or whatever, what is it about their content that is making you watch it more? And you start to notice patterns, and then it's like, okay, this is just like a puzzle that you need to figure out. And then there's also like plenty of coaches and people who have all kinds of free information about how to grow on social media. But I think the first thing is you, especially on social media, like have to niche down big time, more so than even in therapy land. It's like you are the X person. It's like, for me, I'm the person who helps people build and fill private practices. That's it. And like, I could post about other stuff and that may or may not land because my audience listens to me for this thing. And so it's like, if you're the person who people go to when they graduate from graduate school and they want to launch a career, it's like, that's the thing. And you're posting on that every single day on that exact topic rather than trying to be like a generalist, you know? And then I think it becomes about service to those people. And it's not essentially about you at all. I mean, it is about you. You're out there and you're putting yourself out there. But then it takes like, 'cause I think for me, it takes some of the fear away from it because I can say to myself, like, you know what, like, even if there's 3 people out there that want to learn how to build a private practice, that are freaking scared out of their minds, that are stuck at an agency job that they hate, that have a supervisor that's not treating them well, and I know how they can improve their life, and I just get on my camera and say, okay, here are 3 tips on how to do that, then it's not about me, it's about them. And I think it's the same thing for you. It's about those students who are graduating or whatever it is, if that's not, you know, it doesn't have to be that necessarily. Does that make sense?
That does. I think it's motivating to know that, like, especially with like putting myself out there. I mean, technically I've done it before.
Yeah.
I don't think I put the two together. And social media is just about like watching patterns. I don't think that's something that I took into mind. But I I could see myself doing this on my own and not necessarily with the group. Filling interns at a low rate is not as easy as I thought it would be.
Yeah.
So like, I'm curious if you have any tips about like marketing, like having interns learn what it looks like to market themselves while working in a private practice.
Yeah.
I know I like pivoted there.
No. I'm happy to pivot. So I would say, like, first of all, I have some bias around this for sure. In the sense that, like, there are other private practice coaches out there who I love. Lindsay, Nicole, like, I can link them down below, who've both been on this podcast, who are so beyond passionate about helping therapists build groups. That is not me, because I love solo practice. I think it's great. I've always loved working in a group office setting. But when it comes to group practice, the issue that I always see people having is this idea that, like, they're going to train people and fill people's practices when they're interns or associates, whatever they call them in your state. And then they're going to be there for 2, maybe 3 years, and then they're going to leave. And then that leaving point, I feel like a lot of private practice owners don't prepare themselves for. And then they've spent all this time filling their practices. And so, but it sounds like you have one person who's like more of a person that stays, right? And then you have 3 associates. So in terms of filling their practices, what I actually suggest doing, rather than spending a ton of time marketing the group, is teaching them how to market themselves, teaching them exactly the things that you did to fill your private practice and giving them some of those skills and tools to do that. And so maybe you give them a certain number of clients that they're going to have, like you decide how many referrals you're going to send to them. But then also when you hire people, and this goes to the financial structure of how you pay them, which I obviously don't know, is you take into account that there's some level of expectation that they're doing some marketing. Now, depending on how you set up their pay structure, you might have to pay them to do that. So, but I think empowering them with some of the tools so that you're not the only one trying to fill an entire group. Does that make sense?
That does. They are all on a 1099 basis because I tell them this all the time.
Yeah.
We are in a state in Colorado where there are not many therapists of color.
Yeah.
So I need to prepare myself to let y'all go.
Right.
So that I can refer to you in the future. And the next student of color who's coming in can have that spot so that you can grow. Right. So I think it's just like been the model that I've had.
Which is great, because that ultimately should be the model, that like they're there to train, they're there for a certain period of time, and that you empower them to go out into the world and create their own business. And ideally, you're giving them that mentorship and those skills, which is funny because that's coming back to like what you just told me you like to do, is like giving people those business skills. So
I didn't put that
full
together.
fucking circle, right? So that being said, that fits with your model of helping them learn how to fill their practices, right?
Yeah.
Do you guys do any of that? Like, do you take them out on, like, I know I had a boss who would, if I asked, would take me on marketing lunches or would introduce me to people or take me to networking meetings. Like, do you offer those type of opportunities to them?
I do. So I've done a lot of like warm handoffs, or warm like introductions to other therapists. I'm actually having a cookie decorating party in a few weeks. Where there'll be a lot of therapists there, and I'm getting them all business cards, like both digital and paper ones, so that they'll be able to have like the practice of talking to folks there. And all 3 of my interns, they work in a nonprofit setting for part of their hours with me.
Right.
So that they're able to build some better connections with the community that they're in. Right. Rather than just doing it with me, so that other folks know them individually.
Yeah, I think a hybrid model is always a good way to go, because Also, then
Right.
they're not only relying on private practice income, which can be stable or can be unstable. I mean, it just depends
Yeah.
on the timing. So how is that? And obviously, like, you have interns and they have their own confidentiality. So just in general, how do you feel like those warm handoffs are going?
My interns are incredibly motivated human beings.
Yeah.
I think I got really, really lucky with even all 4 therapists
Yeah.
where they're really motivated to do good work.
Right.
So in terms of like introducing them to folks, that it seems like they're really motivated to do it and they are willing to ask a lot of questions, and they're like, at least the responses that I've got have all been positive. So I'm not necessarily worried about like their ability to go out and do it. I think I just have to like be really consistent with giving them the skills to like go out and do it well.
Do you guys have group supervision at some point each week or something?
We're trying to get that on the schedule.
Yeah, it's hard.
We all started at different times.
Yeah.
But definitely starting in January when all 3 of them are in existence at the same time. The goal is to have a group supervision, but I meet with each of them for an hour for individual supervision.
Oh, they have individual. Got it.
Yeah.
Well, that's great. So either way, I mean, whether it's an individual or a group, I think it starts with sitting down and identifying for both you and the intern. I keep getting tripped up because we call them associates in California, but I know what you mean. Is setting some goals that are marketing related. And so really asking them which parts of marketing they enjoy, which parts they are willing to invest their time in, and then what support they need from you, what education, what resources, whatever it is, in order to do that form of marketing. Whether it's, and you're about to take my marketing course, so it's going to give you a ton of different ideas. And you could even show them different modules in that and say like, okay, you're going to work on this thing. How can I support you in doing that? And give them those resources. And that involves, since you're the boss too, it's like, do they need business cards? Do they need, whatever it is to go out into the world and do some marketing? And I think I would make that a part of your supervision so that like they play upon their individual strengths. Because like you're saying, like when you built your practice, your strength was going out into the community and networking. And as somebody, like, that's my strength too. That's how I prefer to build practices. But some other people might say, you know what, social media is like the way I want to go. And it's like, whatever they do, they need to do consistently, Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. I can do
but
that.
I would just set some goals with them. Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
I can't, sorry, I interrupted you. I said I would just set some goals with them. I think that's great.
Some goals with them. Yeah. Because I find when I supervise like other candidates for their licenses, like the career piece has just come up over and over again.
Yeah.
So again, full freaking circle. So that's good to know. I think the last like topic-ish is really like meeting with therapists. Because I find for myself, if I go out to meet someone and I send them a referral and they send me a referral, then it kind of ends there. So like, how do we like keep it going? So it's not just like a done thing.
Okay. This is, I think, easily one of the most important things in private practice is how do you build these long-term referral relationships? And this is like an entire module of my upcoming course. So we're just going to go briefly on this, and you're taking that course anyway. So
cool.
But I would say like the overall framework that I think of is the goal is to form professional friendships with people, which my guess is that you're good at. Right. And so what that takes, just like any friendship, is repeat contact. So it's like, first you have coffee with them. Then you had a good sense of it already. You're sending them a referral. Then, and I'm not saying you have to be hanging out with them every week, but maybe I don't know if you guys have like Colorado Association of Marriage and Family Therapists or whatever. Maybe you invite them to an event that's like a speaker event that you and 2 other therapists are going on. Or maybe you sometimes like a couple of my therapist friends and I would have like a stranger party. We call it, like basically where we each bring someone that no one else knows and we all go to lunch. Or maybe you send them an email that's like, hey, this is an article about something we read that I thought you'd be interested in. Or maybe you form a consultation group and you invite them to be a part of that consultation group. Or at the holidays, you do a little holiday drop off of gifts. And like little things, like I try to remember people's birthdays and I send a birthday card. I don't send like a big gift. I said, and then the best way I think to maintain that repeated contact is on cases. Like if you have a psychiatrist or a doctor who you have cases with, you ask them, I'd love to be able to give you clinical updates in the best, most efficient way possible. Do you prefer an email? Do you prefer a voicemail? And that you consistently work on cases with people. And that like ultimately you're going to have the most contact with people when you do that. In the marketing course, there's a whole module on this and you could watch it. You could watch it with your interns. And you could give me all your feedback and let me know if you like it. But it's a huge skill to be able to build those long-term referral relationships. So, okay, Josie, I have a question for you. Okay.
Sure.
So we talked about a lot of different topics today. We talked about your interns. We talked about multiple streams of income. We talked about networking. So if you had to kind of boil down our conversation into like 2 action steps that you're going to take, what do you want to do to move forward with some of this stuff?
I think the first action step is really giving my team skills, and like really that like support and education on like marketing themselves. So that's definitely one. And number 2 is I really like that group idea. So thanks for giving that one.
And tell me when you launch it, because I'm more than happy to tell people about it. I have people ask me all the time for this kind of stuff. So I'm more than happy to help you get people in it.
Thanks. I think that that group, I mean, I could make a workbook and I could do that in my sleep.
Yeah.
So I think I would try and combine those 2.
Yeah.
So at least there's like some level of like a commitment in a group, so folks can support within that like first year of after graduation. Those feel like the 2 biggest steps.
So I'm going to make sure to follow up with you on both of those things. And I want to know, for kind of our last thing on the podcast, is as you think back, because really it's amazing. Like you're talking about a lot of cool projects. And if you think back to those like early weeks that we just talked about in the beginning of putting yourself out there, what do you wish you had known when you started your private practice?
That's a really good question. What do I wish I knew? I wish I knew that even if it's hard temporarily. The mistakes that you make, if you learn from them and don't repeat them, they're mistakes and they stay temporary. Even if you make the same mistake a couple times, because I definitely have done that.
I am still making some of them.
Like every trial in private practice, unless you like really get yourself into a pickle, are temporary.
Yeah.
And so I think of each like stage and phase that was really hard, and I like kind of always came out on the other side.
Yeah.
And I think another piece is I assumed that I would have to work really hard to get support. But from jump, I had support from my supervisors. I had support from my partner, which was really great. I had support from my sister, and my family kind of came around with time once they figured out what I was doing.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think those are probably the biggest things I would say.
I love it. Well, Josie, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. We're going to follow up. Maybe we'll do a part 2 in a few months. And I can't wait to see all the adventures and things you get yourself into.
Cool. I appreciate it so much. Yeah, I'd love to do it again.
Bye.
Bye.
Ask Kelley Anything is just around the corner. But first, a word from our sponsor. Stay tuned for Kelley's response to your private practice questions.
Therapists, do you want more clients at your full cash rate? Mentaya is a platform that navigates out-of-network benefits for clients. They get clients on average 70% back on therapy by filing claims and chasing down insurance companies. They handle literally everything so that you can focus on what matters. Click the link in the show notes to learn more and get 1 month free using the code PRO. Today on Ask Kelley Anything, we're going to talk about getting ghosted for an initial session. So I got a message on Instagram earlier this week, and the therapist basically said, I feel so defeated. 5 or 6 inquiries have ghosted me on the first appointment. What should I do? Now, I obviously don't know this therapist, and that's all I know about them, but I thought it would be an interesting topic for us to talk about today on Ask Kelley Anything, because first of all, it's something that happens to all of us. So anytime something happens in our practice that we don't like, I think there's always 2 things we have to do. One, of course, we have to have self-compassion, right? And we have to realize that a certain amount of clients who don't show up for a first session or who don't call back is really, really normal. And so, sometimes that's just chance and that's just how it happens. However, whenever something is happening in my business that I don't like, I also will ask myself, is there anything that I can do to improve this? So if you have clients who you've already spoken to on the phone, they make that first appointment, and then they don't show up for the first appointment, there are maybe some things that you could do to make it more likely that they will show up for that first session. And here's a few of them. The first thing is that initial phone call is where you build rapport. Everybody does kind of a different way of doing this. I tend to make that first phone call about 30 minutes long. Now, sometimes people will say, I don't have time to do that, but I really think of the first phone call with a client when they kind of initially meet you and hear your voice. That is really, really important. And it's a chance for them to automatically start feeling like you're somebody who gets them and who understands them and who can hold space for them, right? In my scripts book, I have a whole script for kind of how that first phone call can go. But I like to tell therapists that it's important to provide even boundaries within that call. And giving the client the ability to feel kind of a sense of relief by saying something like, hey, on this phone call, why don't I tell you a little bit about me, and then you tell me a little bit about you, and then we'll discuss my fees and appointments. And you give them that framework so that they can relax and they don't feel like they have to do the work of the phone call. And then they feel like, oh, this person is here and I don't have to be the one taking care of everything. They're taking care of it, right? That can be one really good way to make sure that clients do show up to their first session, is make sure to build that rapport. Sounds simple, but sometimes it's harder than it is. Also, make sure that they're clear on what your fees and your insurance policies are, right? If the first time they hear your fee is not on the phone with you, but is instead in your paperwork, it's a higher likelihood that they're not going to show up for that first session, right? You want to give them as much information as you can about the process of how they're going to pay for therapy on that phone call so that they're more likely to show up. The other thing that we don't think about a lot of the time is that people will look you up on the internet, right? Especially if they found you on the internet initially. So you want to make sure to clean up your website. You want to make sure to clean up your social media presence, right? You don't know, maybe you have some photos on MySpace from a ton of years ago, you doing something you shouldn't be doing, right? There might be things that you don't realize are out there that you just want to take a few minutes in case a client Googles you right when they meet you or right when they talk to you and don't necessarily tell you that they do. Make sure that your web presence really reflects who you are. Other thing sometimes I suggest doing is if you have kind of a high turnover rate or you work with clients who feel like they might not want to be coming to therapy initially, one thing you can do is make sure you have lots of blog posts and resources and videos on your website so they can start getting kind of attached and get some info even before they might come in. And so one thing you could do is you could say, hey, I know you're struggling with this. I have some resources on my website. Before you come in next week, feel free to kind of take a look at those. The last tip I would say is oftentimes people are calling more than one therapist. And if you're really busy, it can be hard to schedule right away. But what I find is oftentimes clients end up booking with the people that they saw first. So if you have a new client, I never book same day appointments, but would I maybe book it the next day? Yeah. Might I book it a couple days later? Yeah. If you're booking 2 to 3 weeks out, somebody oftentimes is going to be meeting with someone else before that, and they might not necessarily be meeting with you. So I hope these tips help kind of increasing your client retention in that first appointment. Remember, we all get ghosted sometimes. It's okay. Just keep working on building rapport.
Are you wondering how to promote and fill your private practice? Look no further. Kelley's comprehensive online course, Marketing for Therapists, will equip you with the essential marketing strategies to build a thriving 6-figure therapy practice. Don't miss out on this opportunity for success. Check out the show notes to sign up.
If you would like to be featured on Ask Kelley Anything, I love getting listener questions from you guys. Anything about private practice goes. And the best way to do that is actually just to give me a call and leave me a question on my voicemail. So I'm going to tell you the phone number right now and make sure to write it down. Here it is, 805-243-8241. I'm looking forward to hearing from you.